Hi, welcome to our introduction to ISO 45001-2018. My name is Dominic Myers. I am the Training Delivery Manager here at Alcumus ISOQAR. Today we'll be looking at what's included in our brief presentation. We're going to look at 45001 aims and objectives and the benefits of our new health and safety system. We're going to look at the structure of the standard, perhaps how it differs from the OSAS 18001, its predecessor. We're going to look at documented information and also a quick note to say that the Alcumus ISOQAR gap analysis is now available should you wish to get hold of one of those. Let's look at the aims and objectives of ISO 45001. And whilst we're at the beginning of this short presentation, it may be worth just taking a look at what David Smith, the chairman of the project committee entitled Development of Occupational Health and Safety Management Systems, has to say on the new ISO 45001 standard. So looking at our aims and objectives of ISO 45001, we're really looking at objectives that are obviously broadly the same as OSAS 18001. We are looking for a risk-based, robust framework for managing occupational health and safety risk, preventing work-related injury, preventing ill health, providing safe and healthy workplaces, and also tying that idea of addressing opportunities for improvement as soon as we possibly can, and obviously fulfilling our legal and other requirements. So just to pick out a few key success factors in the successful implementation of ISO 45001. Of course, as with all the Annex SL standards, we're looking at top management, commitment, responsibility, development, leading, promoting, all those key words for successful health and safety management. And the standard this time round also talks about the culture of successful occupational health and safety and the communication and constant consultation and participation of workers and workers' representatives throughout the standard, which we're hoping is going to push forward effective hazard identification in the control of risk and being able to take advantage of those occupational health and safety opportunities to improve. Finishing off there, again, with this idea of a realistic assessment of the context, the internal and external issues affecting the occupational health and safety in and around our organisation. So let's have a look at the benefits of ISO 45001 implementation. So moving on to the benefits of ISO 45001 implementation. Of course, we're looking for effective management of an occupational health and safety risk and opportunity based system. And obviously moving on from that, the improvement of our occupational health and safety performance. The idea that these things center around an involvement of management and worker participation is key to this new standard. Right the way through, as we'll see from clause 4.1 to clause 10, the idea we have participation and consultation culture, a strand running through the standard. Obviously, other benefits include now the opportunity for a fully integrated ISO management system, an integrated management system approach. Now we have the sort of core 14,001, 9,001, 27,001, and 45,001. We have a blueprint for a central, risk-based, process-driven ISO management system. Let's have a look at the structure of the new ISO 45001 standard. So looking at an overview of the new 45001 structure, I'm sure it will be familiar to most people. We have the Annex SL traditional 10 clause structure. We've got clauses 1 to 3 scope, normative references and terms and definitions referring to the use of the document, and obviously clauses 4 to 10, the operational implementation from context, leadership, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, and improvement. Of course, if we just look back at clause 5, though, we've got a slight change in that heading, leadership and worker participation, pushing that the idea of worker participation in the standard right from the sort of the get-go. And those 10 clauses forming as well on the left-hand side, walking through the plan, do, check, act cycle. So here we have an overview of 45,001 in our traditional plan, do, check, act cycle. As you can see, we have clauses 4 to 10 overlaid on this slide. In essence, exactly the same as it's laid out on the front pages of ISO 45001. So let's just run through it quickly. We'll go into a little bit more detail later on in the presentation. So we have our context at the top in clause for our internal and external issues, and also the needs and expectations of interested parties. We have the word workers inserted into that title, which is a bit of a clue of the way things are going to go as we walk through it. We will see that idea that workers are involved in everything as we move through the standard. So we have our context decided, which obviously derives the scope of our management system. We have in moving on from clause 4.3 to 4.4, we have leaders and worker participation central now to the management of the standard. Leaders, workers, interested parties push forward to the planning for risks and opportunities in clause 6 in the planning section of our standard. And moving through to the sort of do section of the plan, do, check, act cycle, we have the support clause listing the resources, the competencies, awareness, communications, documented information that we will need for the successful implementation of our 45,001 standard. Also in the do phase, we have our operation, looking at the eliminations of hazards using the hierarchy of control. We are looking at how we implement and manage change, how we manage procurement of both contractors and general outsourcing. The requirements for emergency preparedness and response, all included there in operation. Before we move on to the performance evaluation section of the standard in clause 9, looking at how we monitor, measure and analyze performance. We can look at how we evaluate performance, the requirements for internal audit, and also the requirements for management review in clause 9. Before we move through the cycle into improvement, looking at non-conformity, corrective action and incidents. The idea being obviously that this hopefully forms an iterative, repeatable improvement pattern from which we can gain occupational health and safety improvements throughout our organisation. So let's walk through the standard in a little more detail now. So let's have a little look at context, clause 4.1. The standard says that the organisation shall determine internal and external issues that are relevant to its purpose and affect its ability to achieve the intended outcome. So important then for us to understand that context is a fluid concept and changes regularly, and as such, perhaps should be reviewed regularly. Issues can include, for example, on the external side, relationships with external providers, new technologies. The standard uses the word culture in a couple of places this time around. So there was the idea of cultural issues sort of moving into focus a little bit. Uh, Perhaps internal issues can include changes planned or foreseeable, the competencies of the workforce, and the size of the organisation and the complexities uh, of the organisation and the processes contained therein. There is no requirement to document context, but my view on that would be, well, how can you determine and monitor and measure your internal and external issues unless you have some sort of documentation there to record them. So moving on to talk about clause 5. Now there is a fundamental change in the title of this clause from the other Annex SL documents such as 14,001, 9,001 and 27,001. The title is Leadership and Worker Participation. Okay, so the top line on 5.1 is the same as the other standard. It describes top management demonstrating leadership and commitment with respect to the occupational health and safety management system. And then we'll walk us through clauses A to I the exact same way as other Annex SL standards, for example, 9001 does. However, we have J, K, L, and M, which are additional clauses that do not appear in the other Annex SL standards. And as you can see, these subclauses are quite key in pulling in the idea that we are developing a strong culture. Indeed, 5.1J, as you can see, talks about directly developing and promoting a culture and awareness. 5.1K talks about the idea of protecting workers from reprisals and reporting incidents. 5.1L, ensuring the organisation establishes and implements a process for consultation and participation of workers. So not just in the participation of perhaps decisions that have already been made, but in consultation, the decision-making process. And 5.1M, again, touches on the idea that the top management should support the establishment and functioning of health and safety committees. So some key changes there from the other Clause 5 Annex SL standards. So moving on to look at Clause 5.4, consultation and participation of workers. Firstly, just have a little look exactly what the ISO definitions of those two words are, consultation and participation. So, consultation, the ISO definition for consultation would be to seek views before making a decision, and participation, involvement in decision making. So very much involved in the involvement of decision making. Workers, there be management and non-managerial workers. Now, Clause 5.4 is the largest single clause addition to this new standard. And as we can see, talks very heavily about worker representation and how this can be a mechanism for consultation and participation. And not to paraphrase the standard, but we need to be looking at removing obstacles and any barriers to participation and consultation of workers. And consultation may take the form of health and safety forums, health and safety representatives, maybe toolbox talks, maybe the development of the involvement of people in risk assessments, etc. I guess looking at that inclusive culture as a whole, the key idea really around clause 5.4. Just moving through clause 5.4, on this side we can still see on 5.4D 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9 that continuing emphasis on the consultation of non-managerial workers right throughout the plan do check act cycle, involving planning, objectives, outsourcing, procurement, monitoring and measuring, implementation, maintaining of audit program, and ensuring continual improvement. That consultation of non-managerial workers highlighted throughout in clause 5.4. So while 5.4D emphasises the consultation of non-managerial workers, clause 5.4E focuses an emphasis on the participation of non-managerial workers right through risks and opportunities in 6.1, looking for actions to eliminate hazards in 6.1.4, looking at competence training, evaluating training in 7.2, moving on to clause 8 and then clause 10. So right the way through the plan, do, check, act cycle. A last note on 5.4, just looking at the bottom of this slide, a note says emphasising the consultation and participation of non-managerial workers is intended to apply to persons carrying out the work activities, but not intended to exclude managers who are impacted by work activities or other factors in the organisation. I think that's quite an important point. It keeps within the standards thinking of an inclusive approach, a holistic approach to occupational health and safety management. Moving on to clause 6 of ISO 40001, very similar in many respects to the other Annex SL documents in taking the requirements from 4.1 context, requirements from 4.2 interested parties and the subsequent scoping of the system in 4.3, and providing hazard identification, examining risks, looking for opportunities to improve and looking to manage our legal requirements and perhaps the other requirements around interested parties, for example. And from that to derive some occupational health and safety objectives where we can. Moving on to look at clause 6, planning for risks and opportunities. We start off with the first step, hazard identification. The standard says the organisation shall establish, implement and maintain a process for hazard identification that is ongoing and proactive. The processes shall take into account but not be limited to, and then we start to look at the detail of the clause. However, I guess to summarise some of that detail, the standard's looking at a holistic approach. It's looking at the involvement in managerial and non-managerial workers in hazard identification, as we all know. Some key elements could be human factors and human interaction. For example, how work is performed, maybe job rotation, ergonomics, repetition. The standard also talks about workers at the location not under control or under direct control, maybe on-site jobs, perhaps at another factory or at another site over which we just have influence and not direct control. Continuing that holistic approach to the hazard identification and obviously identification of risks and opportunities. The standards also talks about looking at a myriad of other issues, right from design of work areas, operation procedures, worker organisation, situations not directly controlled by the organisation, changes occurring in the whole organisation, and changes in the knowledge or information about hazards. Again, just reflecting that holistic approach to hazard identification. Moving through to look at clause 6.1.2.2, the assessment of occupational health and safety risks and other risks to the occupational health and safety management system. So I guess when that title talks about other risks, I would assume we're talking about things like changing process, changing machinery, maybe new starters, could be an increase in orders or perhaps a decrease in orders may represent other risks to the occupational health and safety management system. This part of the standard goes on to talk about the methodology and criteria for the assessment of occupational health and safety risk needs to be defined, and it needs to be documented and maintained rather. So we need to look at the best way, the most effective way of documenting this assessment of occupational health and safety risks and the other risks which feed into that occupational health and safety management system. We've moved through clause 6.1. We've talked about identification of hazards, identification of risks, and the required idea that we need documented information for this, as you would expect. We also now need to focus on the occupational health and safety opportunities that we can derive in our standard. We can look at opportunities to adapt work and work organisation to suit workers, opportunities to eliminate hazard and reduce risks, and any other opportunities that feed into our occupational health and safety management system. 6.1.3 talks about the determination of our legal requirements and other requirements, and that we need documented information, as you would expect. Clause 6.4 talks about the planning actions and how we would prepare for and respond to emergency situations. And I guess that ties back into clause 8.2 that we'll discuss later on. Moving through clause 6.2.2, looking at objectives. As with other ISO standards, 14,001 and 27,001, for example, the standard says that the objectives should be measurable if practicable. I think that's a bit of a get out. My take on that is objectives should be measurable. Hey ho, it's about what the standard says. So there we go. Moving through that part of the standard, the organisation again shall retain documented information on the objectives and plans to achieve them. Moving through the structure of ISO 45001, let's have a little look at clause 7, support. Here, like the other Annex SL documents, we look at resources, competence, awareness of occupational health and safety policy and objectives, effective communication throughout the organisation, which in this standard needs to be documented information as detailed in 7.4.1. The documented information requirements are the same as other ISO management system standards in 7.5. Moving on to look at clause 8 of the standard. The standard talks about in a very similar format to the standards, starting with our operational control and the idea that we obviously need to maintain and retain documented information for that. Taking from 6.1 the identification of the hazards into 8.1.2, the elimination of hazards using the hierarchy of control, starting with elimination and finishing with PPE. We need to adequately manage change. And also there is a note on 8.1.4 that talks about management of procurement and having stronger occupational health and safety controls around both our contractors and our outsourcing function. So we're looking at contractors' activities, the contractors' activities that impact us on the workers, and general coordination with external providers and ensuring that our occupational health and safety performance is effective. Moving on to look at clause 9 of 45,001. Very similar in structure to the other annexes of documentations. We start with 9.1, the monitoring, measuring and analysis and performance evaluation. What are we going to measure? What are we going to analyze? And how are we going to evaluate that compliance? Taking that back to the details recorded in 6.1.3. The key tools in the check part of the plan, do, check, act cycle being the establishment of an internal audit program. A slight difference here, as the standard asks us in 9.2.2 to ensure the results of the audits are reported to relevant managers and ensure that relevant audit results are also reported to workers, where they exist workers' representatives and other relevant interested parties. Management review 9.3, again very similar in structure, inputs and outputs, but for this standard with the added statement that top management shall communicate the relevant outputs of management review to workers and where there exists workers' representatives. Clause 10, improvement. Specifically moving to clause 10.2, non-conformity and corrective action now has incident added to the title, becoming incident, non-conformity and corrective action. Of course, as you would expect, the organisation having to retain documented information of the nature of incidents or non-conformities, any subsequent corrective actions, and the effectiveness of that corrective action. And again, the last clause of the standard, clause 10.3, looking for and maintaining documented information as evidence of continual improvement. If we can take a minute to have a recap, an overview of ISO 45001 implementation. We start by understanding the occupational health and safety context of our organisation, looking at risks and threats, feeding through and looking at risks and opportunities, our compliance obligations, and moving those contextual issues from clause 4 of the standard via top management into planning action from clause 6 of the standard. We can establish our occupational health and safety objectives, hopefully measurable objectives, but that's not what the standard says. The standard says objectives should be measurable if practicable. And then we put forward the resources in clause 7, the competencies, the awareness, the communications of internal and external communications in clause 7 for us to be able to implement operational control in clause 8 of the standard, focusing on key areas such as controlling and monitoring our contractors and our outsourcing, ensuring emergency preparedness and response is in place and documented. Moving through that clause 8 to clause 9, where we're looking at the performance evaluation, how we monitor and we measure and we analyze our occupational health and safety performance. Key tools included here would be the risk-based internal audit schedule and management review that is reflected very, very similarly to the other Annex SL standards. However, there is a note in management review that talks about the relevant outputs of management review being available to workers and workers' representatives, again, focusing on that key concept of worker involvement right the way through the plan, do, check, act cycle. Moving through to clause 10, improvement, looking at the management of incidents, non-conformities, and corrective action, and indeed continual improvement, feeding right back through the system to the top, understanding the context of the organization. A cycle of improvement following a plan, do, check, act cycle. It's risk and opportunity based and focusing on a process flow format, ideally suited to an integrated management system. For further information on ISO 45001 and what you need to do to move forward from OSAS 18001, please visit our website and search for 45001 and have a look at the resources we've got available, including a very useful gap analysis. We also offer a 45001 starter pack that gives you a very good introduction to the standard and will help you on your way to take you to ISO 45001 certification. Thank you for listening. Please give us a call at Alchemist ISOQAR Client Services if you need any support with your or with any aspects of ISO 45001 investigation or implementation. And if you're not a client and you need some more information, please give us a call on 0161 865 3699. Thank you very much.